From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
I have been asked when death occurred for these individuals. There is no reliable scientific method to accurately determine the exact time or date of death. Mr. Hackman's initial pacemaker data revealed cardiac activity on February 17th, with subsequent pacemaker interrogation demonstrating an abnormal rhythm of atrial fibrillation on February 18th, which was the last record of heart activity. Based on this information, it is reasonable to conclude that Mr. Hackman probably died around February 18th. Based on the circumstances, it is reasonable to conclude that Ms. Hackman passed away first, with February 11th being the last time that she was known to be alive. It's difficult to answer. The question was he aware that Ms. Hackman had died? And I think that question's difficult to answer, but I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 28th season in this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, caring for the Alzheimer's caregiver. Joining us to talk more about it are Sadie Hinkle, Program Director for the Alzheimer's Association Nebraska Chapter, and David Thompson. David is the board chair and an elder law attorney. He was also the family caregiver for his mother, Nancy. I want to thank you both for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. Sadie, I'm going to start with you and your reaction to that opening video.
Yeah, I'm sure my reaction is the same as anyone who sees that video, which is it is just incredibly heartbreaking on so many levels, you know, both for the person living with Alzheimer's, but even more so his caregiver. And I think that really highlights the importance and even danger of navigating a dementia diagnosis, especially if you do so alone. And isolation can, you know, in this case, be really dangerous.
Yeah. What is, or how do you explain dementia to people?
Dementia is really an umbrella term that encompasses a change in memory, thinking, reasoning, or behavior that is severe enough to interfere with daily life. So most people equate dementia and Alzheimer's together to be the same thing, but dementia is more of that umbrella term that encompasses all of those symptoms of memory loss.
Okay, how many types are there?
There are believe it or not, over 100 different types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is one people hear about probably most often. You may hear Alzheimer's disease more than others, and that is because it makes up about 60 to 80% of all dementia diagnoses that we see as Alzheimer's disease, but there are lots of other types of dementia as well.
We're going to put those up for our viewers, Sadie, and talk about, if you would, the importance of knowing what type your family member may be dealing with.
Sure. At the Alzheimer's Association, we are huge advocates for early detection because, first of all, now there are treatments available for Alzheimer's disease that have been recently FDA approved in about the past year. So early detection is important for that reason, but it's also really important to understand the type of dementia that you have, whether it's vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, because in order to understand how to navigate that diagnosis, you need to understand which type of dementia that you have. So that's all really important.
Okay, for the purposes of this program, we're going to drill down into Alzheimer's a bit. And as we do that, we're going to put up another graphic for our viewers. Talk to us about the 10 warning signs.
Sure. I think the first warning sign that people think about when they think of dementia or Alzheimer's disease is memory loss. And that is a warning sign, one that's severe enough to interfere with daily life, but challenges in planning or solving problems, difficulty completing familiar tasks, messing up time and place, not being able to see properly and have problems visually, changes in speaking or writing, misplacing things is a big one, decreased or poor judgment, withdrawing from work or social activities, and then also changes in mood and personality. So we see a lot more than just changes in memory. People's behaviors typically change, their mood changes. They may be worried that they're displaying some of those warning signs and don't want people to know, so they may just completely withdraw from social settings.
All right, another really important question. If you notice these in a loved one, what should you do?
We are huge proponents, and I'm sure David can agree with this, that we need to break down that stigma that we know surrounds Alzheimer's and dementia. People are scared to talk about it. Of course, it can be a scary thing, but my advice is if you notice those warning signs, to talk to your loved one about it, even if you notice it in yourself or a loved one. Have family conversations about it. Don't keep it a secret, and then follow up with your primary care physician.
Okay, thank you. David, we have some beautiful photos that we're going to put up for our viewers. And as we do that, could you please tell us about your mom?
Well, my mother was a very dynamic person. She was a very successful child and family therapist who did lots of public speaking, lots of teaching. She was quite a mentor. And she kept that going until the very end. She was sort of the welcome committee in the memory care unit, where she, so every time there was a new person, she would go talk with them, and she would sometimes say, well, I am a therapist, so I can help you with whatever problems you might have, even when she was very far into the Alzheimer's diagnosis. So one thing I always say about my mom is she was a 100-watt bulb in a 60-watt world.
Well,
so.
How did you know that there was something different about your mom?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I moved in with my mother in 2013, partly just to help her out with taking care of my father and my disabled sister. And I started to notice changes in her behavior too, but I think it took me a couple of years. It actually took me until a doctor explained it to me to really think about it as Alzheimer's, because my mother was generally forgetful. And so I was always leaving her notes every morning, and I would say, today's the date, here's your medicine, here's what you have on your schedule for today. And even when I was doing that, I didn't necessarily think I'm doing this because she has Alzheimer's. I just thought of myself as just trying to kind of help her out in terms of what she had to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. You were a primary family caregiver, I think it's fair to say. How did you get into that role? I think we have families watching. Some step into it willingly, right? They know what's happening. Others kind of get nudged into it, right? So what was your story in terms of becoming one of those primary caregivers?
Well, I mean, I think in a lot of families, the first question is who's going to do it? And in my family, that wasn't a question because my sister is disabled. I was the only professional child, and so there was no doubt that I was going to play that role. Luckily, my mother has two very close friends who are both, about 15 years younger than her, and those two friends have essentially become family members for me. And so we were, to a certain extent, a team of three. Neither one of them lives in Omaha, so it was still pretty much a one-man job, but at least I felt like there was somebody that I could call and ask questions and just share feelings and that kind of thing. So.
Okay, and as you step into that role, I mean, it can be very overwhelming, obviously, right? What would you say to viewers would be the most important things to be thinking about and eventually doing? So you step into that role and you say, oh my goodness, I'm here now, and this is what I need to be paying attention to.
I think the most important thing is learning how to put your own feelings aside, particularly in family relationships. Who knows what kind of history you might have with your parents or other family members, and who knows what's going to emerge. It also makes a very big difference as to whether you have somebody whose moods sort of turn in the negative direction as a result of the dementia, or moods that turn in the positive direction. My mother I was fortunate in the sense that she was relatively cheerful and almost jolly up until the very end. But I do think that it's paramount that you kind of stop thinking about things in terms of yourself and focus very much on the needs of the other person. partly because if you think you're going through a difficult experience, think about what they're going through. I mean, for me, thinking about my mother, the hardest part now is looking back at that period where she was gradually losing control of things, and she knew that it was happening. That was the hardest part, especially for somebody like her who was very intelligent, very verbal, very engaged, and she could kind of feel that slipping away. So I had to kind of help her deal with that without getting too depressed herself, but also kind of taking care of my own feelings as well.
I want you to talk more about that because it's super important, and I think something that is oftentimes overlooked. Dementia is progressive. It doesn't get better, right? So I would like it if you would talk about that progression from where, and you did a little bit from where your mom was, but also where you as the caregiver were. I mean, you mentioned you have to kind of come outside of yourself and get into the care of that individual, but to watch somebody go through dementia can be incredibly difficult. It sounds like with your mom, that wasn't maybe difficult, but because her personality kind of stayed the same, that made it a little bit maybe more bearable. But you've got two journeys going on here. You've got the one where it's the individual, and then you have you who's watching this and knowing that you're going to have to respond in a way that's best for them. So talk about those two journeys and how you stay together.
Well, as an elder law attorney, one of the concepts we use a lot is we think about the least restrictive alternative, which is you want to give the person as much free will, as much agency, as much control over themselves as you possibly can, so you don't want to be ordering them around. I think a lot of people, especially when they're concerned, they're like, oh, I don't want my parent to fall, so I better constantly warn them. You have to be careful about that. You have to, there's another phrase that I find helpful is the dignity of risk. You have to be willing to accept the fact that they want to have their own agency, they want to be making up their own minds to the extent they can, and if that means that they're at a little bit of risk, maybe of falling or something like that, to a certain extent you just kind of have to accept that. I mean, one of the big things with my mother, for instance, was when she was in assisted living before she moved into memory care, she had a couple instances where she left the facility and just went wandering around. So they insisted on putting a wander guard around her ankle, which meant that every time she walked near a door, an alarm would sound and the door would shut. And my mother found this so embarrassing and just frustrating that I finally had to go to the facility and say, you know what? I will sign whatever release of liability you want me to sign so that my mother can have quality of life, so that she can feel like she has control over her day-to-day life and her movements around. I know it's risky, but that's the way my mother would want to have it.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you about the day-to-day, because we know that anxiety can become an issue with the caregiver, depression, just quality of life in general. So you've given us an example there, but really big picture, day-to-day, what was that like with your mom?
Well, I mean, I think for me, a lot of it just came down to energy. I mean, I have a very demanding job, and it's very hard to come home after a long day where you've been thinking about all sorts of different things and just shift your focus to this one person. And it might be very time consuming. You don't know what it is that they need. You don't need to what it is. You might have to sit with them for an hour or more to kind of help them sort through some problem or help them understand, family finances or anything like that. I think that's a real challenge. And I see that with my clients too, where people are just constantly fighting off exhaustion because, in a way it's a lot like being a parent of a small child. You can't tell your parent with dementia, like, okay, I just need to be by myself right now, so you're just going to have to take care of yourself for the next couple hours. You just can't do that. So making that adjustment, especially, I don't have any children of my own. I'm fairly independent, so making that transition was hard for me. And those times where I was going against my mother's wishes, or she was just concerned that we might be doing something that she didn't want to do, dealing with those emotions was also it was kind of a daily struggle.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that too, because you're surrounded. I mean, we've all seen this, right? Where you have the caregiver and there are people constantly saying, what can I do to help? Are you okay? And as the caregiver, you're like, you want to be invincible. I'm good, thanks. I've got this all covered. I'm going to be okay. So you're kind of in this sea of people who care, but you're kind of feeling alone all at the same time. Talk a little bit about that, especially to those people out there who may just be starting their caregiving journey.
Well, I mean, I think that sense of feeling alone is really one of the predominant, aspects of being a caregiver. And I think it's partly, you're in your own house, you have your own family, you have your own history, everyone has their own personality. So there is this tendency, and everyone has a different journey. Some people it takes, the whole journey might take a year or two. Some people the journey might take 15 years. Yeah. I was kind of in between from diagnosis to the time of my mother's passing was about 8 years. And, looking back at it now, I realize that there were actually signs much earlier than I thought that I didn't necessarily recognize, and that if I kind of looked over what was happening with her friends, for instance, there were certain issues that came up with her friendships that I didn't really understand at the time, and I thought, they've been good friends for decades. What's going on here? And I've realized since that a lot of that did have to do with dementia, her own. Sadie talked about how people can feel self-conscious and kind of withdraw. And to be honest, friends sometimes withdraw as well. So that's something to get used to, is that in a sense you have to sometimes fill the gap that's created when other people pull away.
What is one thing that you wish those people who cared so much may have done a little differently to lighten especially the emotional load that caregiving can?
I feel in terms of my own situation that I had a fair amount of help, and because of my work as an elder law attorney, I knew how to ask for help. I think that I wish, and there were periods where I was just kind of angry at various people. It's like, you should be handling this better. And it's always odd to me when people say, oh, they repeat themselves all the time. I'm like, really? That's enough of a reason to stop providing the emotional support that you've been providing this person for years and years. So having to, in a sense, navigate my mother's own personal life. And I lived in Chicago for 25 years before I came back to be a caregiver. So she had, a whole world that I wasn't really exposed to, and having to kind of make my way into that and navigate, figuring out where I could be of assistance and where I just kind of needed to back off and leave her to her own devices, even once the dementia had started to progress.
Sadie, I think this is a really good time to talk about the Alzheimer's Association Nebraska chapter. We see the name, people have heard of the walks, and all the rest, but when it comes down to it, what is it that you guys are doing?
Yeah, David just explained how isolating at times caregiving can be, and I think of David, I think he is probably one of the best, well-connected people in terms of this field. And so there are a lot of people who don't know what they don't know. They don't have access to those, connections or resources, and that's really where the association comes into play. So we are a nationwide organization. Like you mentioned, we have walks. The walks are great because they allow us to be the #1 funder of Alzheimer's disease research, not just in the country, but actually in the world. Last year, through walks alone, we raised over $400 million for Alzheimer's disease research. So our vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. We always say that we want to put ourselves out of business because we don't want Alzheimer's disease to exist. But on the local level, of course, we do our local fundraising, but we also provide free education programming across the state to educate people on warning signs, like we discussed earlier, healthy living for your brain and body, ways to help prevent cognitive decline and possibly dementia, and just a wide array of different topics related to Alzheimer's and dementia. And we also host local support groups as well.
And I really want you to talk about those as well,
Yeah,
because I think you talk about stigmas. We're just surrounded by stigmas. And in this case, it's that support group. Oh, I don't need support. I am doing fine, thank you very much. And I don't have time to go to a support group because I am too busy being a caregiver, right? So first of all, kind of set the stage a little bit here for how somebody might explore what a support group is and how they find the one that's the right fit for them. Yeah,
it takes a lot of courage to attend a support group because of that stigma that we know exists. But I have found that every single person I have talked to has only been extremely grateful that they had that confidence to show up to support groups. So we host in-person support groups across the state of Nebraska. We have about 15. Those all can be found on our website. But we also host lots of virtual support groups because caregiving is a 24/7 job, and sometimes people don't have the ability to step away from the home. So we also host virtual support groups as well.
Well, I was going to ask, as you were talking about virtual, how did you guys fare during COVID?
Yeah, COVID was tough, like it was for everyone. You know, we're talking about isolation and how much that affects our minds, our bodies, certainly affects people living with Alzheimer's or dementia. So that's when we, couldn't meet in person in support groups, but we did turn virtual. And so some of those things COVID was good for, so we still keep some of those virtual options. But yeah, we continue to serve people across the state of Nebraska.
Okay, and when we talk we would be remiss if we did not bring up volunteers and how incredibly important they are to the success of not only your organization, but so many across the state. So if someone's watching and they're thinking, I like these two people and I really want to be a part of what it is that they're doing to help other people, talking today about caregivers, of course, what would you say in terms of volunteers and how they fit into the Alzheimer's puzzle?
Yeah, it isn't even a matter of how do they fit in, but they are really just the backbone of what we do. We're a volunteer-led organization. Our volunteers, I talked about those education programs, those are presented by volunteers. Our support groups are entirely volunteer-led. So we have caregivers, like David, who have been through the journey, who knew how tough it was, and so they, in turn, fill their bucket by giving back. So volunteers are, like I said, the backbone of what we do. People can get involved through our walks by volunteering, for our walks to maybe raise money, to form a team, but we're always looking for volunteers to help spread the word and the stigma surrounding Alzheimer's and dementia through the form of community education. And I always tell volunteers too, we want to do what's most fulfilling to you. So maybe you're not a public speaker. I know there are a lot of people who don't like public speaking, but if you just want to help out, there's always room for you at the association, whether it's printing flyers, stuffing folders, participating in walk, there's space for you.
And there is a board of directors, not surprisingly. We have boards all over the place, and you're the chair, right? So how did you get involved, in the minutes we have remaining, in that role, and what would you say is most important to know about a board, especially when it comes to the Alzheimer's Association?
Well, I would just echo what Sadie was saying, and I would also, the 24-hour hotline is extremely important. I mean, when I meet people in the, who are just entering the world of being a caregiver, key 4 easy words: you are not alone. I think that's the message that people really need to hear, partly because you may have never been a joiner, you may have never been belonged to a club or any group in your entire life, but if you're dealing with this experience, which in a lot of cases is the most difficult thing you've ever had to deal with in your life, all of a sudden there's this resource that you might not have ever considered at any other point in your life that people find incredibly valuable. I speak in front of a lot of these support groups, and I find it most moving where they bring along the person who's living with the disease. And oftentimes it's simply because they can't find anybody to take care of them in time for them to go to the support group. So those support groups, being able to kind of strike that balance between this is my unique experience based on my family and my parent situation versus there's commonalities that all of us experience, and that it helps, like I said, to know that you're not alone. I think and you mentioned earlier how it's just hard because it's hard to learn about caregiving when you're spending all your time being a caregiver. You're just too tired to go out and search out those kind of things. So it's hard. It can take a little bit of extra energy, and you sort of feel like, well, gee, do I really have to think about doing something else? Do I need to go to another set of meetings? And I would just say that the benefits are just incalculable. Okay. Those kind of supports.
Sadie, we have about a minute. Lessons learned from the Gene Hackman story.
Navigating a dementia diagnosis and Alzheimer's disease diagnosis is nearly impossible to do alone. And I will echo David's statement that no one is ever in this journey alone, although it certainly can feel very, very isolating. So I encourage anyone, if you know someone living with Alzheimer's or dementia, continue to reach out to them, continue to provide them and their caregiver and their immediate family with support. And if you have Alzheimer's or dementia, make sure you're reaching out to either our local chapter or our 24/7 helpline to get that help.
Okay, talking about caring for the Alzheimer's caregiver today with Sadie and David. Folks wanting more information, we're going to put a graphic up. We've referenced this. So alz.org. That's your website. This helpline that David mentioned, and Sadie, I believe you did too. That's the phone number, 800-272-3900. I'd like to thank the two of you for being here, sharing your time and expertise, and David, your stories. We're sorry for your loss, and know that the memory of your mother will live on in you and all that you're doing for the association. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course to all of you for watching. As we close, a look at the Jean Leahy Mall at the riverfront, as seen through the lens of Pablo Perez, a junior here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television in the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours, or send an email to consider.this@unomaha.edu.
Coming up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Faded breaths to a full.